Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. I'm Ana Lucia Jacome, Senior Project Leader and Human Rights Expert at the Division for People and Social Inclusion at UNITAR. I remain at your disposal in case you want to explore possible synergies on aging and older persons learning initiatives. I encourage you, dear participants, to send your questions or comments to the speakers by using the Q&A Zoom tab. Let me warmly introduce our dear colleague, Dr. Ebru Kanan Sokulu, Associate Director of our CIPAL Global Network at the Division for People and Social Inclusion. She recently joined our Institute's family after a long and inspiring career in the academia. She has several publications related to political science and international relations. Please, Ebru, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ana Lucia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you on all today's webinar. The implications of demographic shifts on social and economic security through labor markets and leisure activities, where we will explore a topic of growing global significance. And yes, we are witnessing an unprecedented transformation in the structure of societies worldwide, from east to west, south to north. And as the number of older adults continues to rise, and this shift presents both opportunities as well as challenges. And this webinar will help us to understand further, deepen our knowledge on these opportunities and challenges. And as we know, in the next few decades, many countries will experience dramatic increase in the proportion of people of age 60 and above. And these challenges will impact nearly every aspect of our societies, from economy, healthcare, labor markets, and social services, intergenerational relationships, and of course, how we define retirement. And we consider aging as no longer just a personal issue, but both a global one, intersecting with economics, politics, culture, and in profound ways. And we hope that our discussion today will focus on how these demographic changes will shape the future. We would like to, of course, touch upon the economic impacts of aging workforce, its implications for productivity and innovation, the strain of social safety nets, and then pension systems, of course, around the world as the ratio of working age individuals, retirees decrease. And of course, the evolving healthcare needs of aging population as well, and how this affects the policies, resource allocation, and social inclusions, and so forth and so on. And well, we are fortunate to have with us an esteemed panel of experts in socioeconomics, public policy, healthcare, demography, who will be sharing their knowledge and perspectives. And I encourage you all to engage, ask questions, and think critically about how these trends are unfolding in your own communities, in your own sectors. Well, thank you again for joining us. I'm confident that today's discussion will be both enlightening and empowering as we look forward toward shaping a future that is prepared for the demographic realities of tomorrow. So now, I think without further ado, let us begin. And I want to thank Ana Lucia again for convening the meeting, and I wish everyone a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Ebru, for your insights. We are happy to have you with us, and we will revert to you for the questions and answers slot. Now I have the honor to welcome distinguished panelists who are going to share some useful insights with us. Let me warmly welcome our dear colleague, Madame Dorothea Schmidt-Cloud. She's the Chief of the Employment, Labor Markets and Youth Branch of the Department of Employment Policy, Job Creation and Livelihoods, EMPLAP, at the UN International Labour Organization. Before her current role, she was the head of the Department Management and Coordination Unit. In both functions, she supported the work of the department to promote full and productive employment by developing integrated employment development and skill policies. She was the senior employment specialist for North Africa. She worked with governments, employers, workers, organizations, and other key stakeholders, providing advice on analytical work, policy development, and advocacy on employment-related issues. She has published extensively in the area of family economics. Also, other areas of experience include gender, poverty reduction, youth employment, aging societies, employment policies, labor market transitions, labor market information systems, and labor market indicators. Congratulations for all the initiatives you have been focused on, dear Dorothea, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back to our series. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be with you again. I will try to share the screen with you because I have prepared some slides to make my point. Let me just see. Okay, here we go. Okay, so let me just, start by reminding us of some realities. As was said in the introduction, we are really talking here about a change that has a magnitude that is maybe has been unseen before. So longevity has literally doubled since 1900, which is the fastest change ever, doubled. I mean, it's really, really an impressive development. And one of my favorite numbers keeps being that a child born today in a developed country has a 50% chance to become older than 100 years. Every second child born today will become older than 100 years. The old age population, 65 plus, will grow by over 300% over the course of this century in comparison to the working age population, which will only grow by less than 50%. And just to remind us as well, when pensions were introduced in Germany, and that's just one of many examples, in 1889, life expectancy was just above 40 years, which means that almost nobody reached the age of retirement and entitlement for pensions. Today, the average life expectancy in Germany is over 80, indicating that the far majority of people will ask for their pensions and do so for a very long time. Labor force participation rates, and of course coming from the ILO, that's the part of the story that is most interesting from our perspective, is normally the lowest for the older people, the lowest compared to other age groups. But we have to say that the issue is not so much that older people are unemployed, it's just that they leave the labor force altogether. Okay, they just don't even look for work anymore. And of course, reskilling investment, and that we all know very well, in older people are lower than for any other age group. So this is the reality one. At the same time, we shouldn't forget about a very serious reality two, which is that we have not solved the youth challenges that we see around the world. And we've just published our global employment trends for youth. And it clearly shows that there are continuously 13% of the young labor force in the world is unemployed, of course, with huge differences between countries and also between men and women. But it's still a very, very high number. 13% of people that are looking for work don't find work. But what is even more worrisome is that 20% of young people were needs in 2023, which means 2 in 3 young people are not in employment, not in education or training, sorry, 20% are not in education, not in employment, and not in training. And out of these 20%, 2 out of 3 are actually women. So there is this huge, huge untapped potential of young people. And it's not just that we don't tap into their potential, we add to their frustration. There is a lack of jobs, there is a lack of decent work, there are enormous educational mismatches, and all that leads to a situation whereby young people have rising anxiety levels. And that's really, really something we should worry about. There is the demographic pressure, meaning, you know, at the same time that we haven't solved the youth issue, we are now entering into this issue with older workers. And we continue to see that even within the group of young people, there are enormous inequalities between high level and high income countries, low income countries, but also within a country, between women and men, between agriculture and other sectors. So there are huge, huge disadvantages, and you can be sure that if anything happens to societies or to economies, it's always the young people hit hardest, and they are also the ones recovering the slowest. Now, the reality 3 is that there are very limited and inaccurate perspectives linked to these trends. So what we hear again and again is that population aging and increased longevity is a burden on national economies, labor markets, health and social care, and is increasing fiscal pressures. This is only partially true, and it's only true because we are not tapping into the potential of these trends that I have just outlined. And then there is this whole issue of, you know, thinking older people are expensive, they are non-productive, they are incapable of adjusting, they are without knowledge on new technologies, they are sick all the time, etc., etc., etc. And these are all perceptions that we hear again and again, especially linked to labor markets. And then there is this very dangerous perception, which is that a lot of and more young people say, wow, now there is this focus on older people, and the older people will take away the few jobs that were there for us. So instead of helping us, you're now helping older people, which will make the situation for us even worse. And this really, really puts a divide into societies, and it also puts a divide into workforces at the enterprise level. We see many more tensions between the young and the old workers because of these developments. And this is just something, it's a reality, and it's something that we have to see and to react to. And I can truly say all the studies that we have done at the country level, at the regional level, at global levels, it's the same story we've seen for women and men. It is not the case that women take away the jobs from men. It is not the case that old people take away the jobs from young people. What we see is that if the labor force participation rate increases for one age group, it increases for the other age group. And this has many reasons, but it's never that the two actually act against each other. Now, with all these challenges, misperceptions, etc., what are the solutions? The aging societies are a reality. The fact that we haven't solved the young people's problem is also a reality. Now, for us, from the ILO perspective, labor markets are part of the solution, maybe a very, very important part of the solution, because labor markets can help us tap into the potential of young people, of old people, of migrant workers, and in all these cases, specifically on women, because many within these groups are not participating in labor markets. And if we say aging societies become an economic burden, well, the easiest way to actually overcome economic struggles is to integrate as many people as possible into labor markets. And there is still a huge untapped potential. But if we want to be successful in doing that, one of the key things is that we have to overcome ageism at the workplace and beyond. I've tried within my small group to actually see whether at our high level of jobs, whether there are these perceptions against older people. And I tell you, they are there and they are extremely strong. So we really have to take into account that older people will only participate in labor markets if we find ways to overcome ageism against them. Ageism also is there against young people. So that's also an issue that we need to tackle. Whoever feels that because of the age they are discriminated against, we need to tackle this problem from various levels. And to do so, it's actually, it could be, or it would help to take more of a perspective of an intergenerational solidarity. Okay, to remind people that we are all responsible for each other and that it's much better to work together and to work in the same direction than to compete with one another. And I think this concept, somehow it got lost. It was very strong in former societies. It was very strong within families, but it was also very strong within communities. And somehow it has been lost, and we think that it should be really integrated and become a strong part of approaches to overcome ageism, to overcome labor market issues, etc. And then, of course, there is this whole issue that we need to find a way to respect the work that takes place outside of labor markets. So all the work, all the contributions, older people who are no longer part of labor markets provide to families, to societies. It's again a very similar issue to what we have seen with regard to women. If we respect this type of work, it also automatically helps to overcome ageism, and it also helps to overcome these perceptions against older people. Now, my key message I want you to take away today is that policies matter. And I want to clarify what I mean by just showing this graph. And we don't go into the details, but what is important here is, first of all, we talk about very different stories, whether we talk about developing economies or whether we talk about developed economies. Now let's focus on the developed economies, which are all the ones on the right side of the graph. And there you see some examples where over not even 20 years, the labor force participation rate of older people has changed tremendously. So just look, for example, the second last country, Singapore. The labor force participation rate of older people used to be just above 50%. Now it is 90%. So 90% of the older people in Singapore participate in labor markets. Sweden has traditionally been relatively high, but it has even increased beyond 90%. So why am I showing you this? I put the life expectancy at the right side, and you see the higher the life expectancy, the more urgent it becomes that older people continue to participate in labor markets, but also the more radical has been the change over the last years. And why did this change happen? It happened because of policies. The difference in these countries and the difference in terms of labor force participation is mainly driven by policies. And this is why I say policies matter. Now, this brings us to the conclusion that we need to have policies in place that intervene at all levels, at the macro level, at the sectoral level, at the enterprise level, at the individual level. Almost nothing will happen automatically unless there is a policy in place. And that means, for example, macro policies have to become more age sensitive. It's not automatically, if you have a certain type of fiscal policy, that it provides jobs for older people or for younger people or for women. Every policy decision, every macro decision you take has an impact on employment, and it has a specific impact on certain groups. And we need to be aware of it. We need to realize that we have a policy choice, and that we need to really take into account, when we choose a policy at the macro level, that it has an age impact as well. The same is the case for investment policies. They need to become age sensitive. And for example, we could need to ensure that the investment goes to sectors that profit from aging, and there are a lot of sectors, and at the same time that provide jobs for older people. We need to have policies that ensure that we make use of technological progress. With aging societies and shrinking workforces, maybe the technological revolution that we see nowadays, maybe that's our lifesaver, because a lot of the work can actually be done with technologies. But of course, we have to be very careful what overall impact that has, and be very careful in terms of choosing the right technologies. We need to put policies in place that incentivize and motivate enterprises to take a more intergenerational approach. We need to put a policy framework that ensures lifelong learning. As I said, for the time being, we see very little investment in the capacities of older people. And we need to have policies in place that ensure a life cost perspective to transitions, meaning don't focus just on the school to work transition. Don't focus just on the work to pension transition. You need to have a life cost perspective, because every single transition you make has an impact on the next transition you do. And we need to keep this in mind when we design policies. Thank you very much for letting me share some thoughts on this with you. And I'm looking forward to your questions and our further discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, dear Dorothea, for taking a stock on the current scenario of labor markets and for referring for feasible solutions for older persons through policies that consider age-sensitive aspects. Of course, their active, free, and meaningful participation is a core element to advance in economic and social efforts. Thank you so much, and we will revert to you with questions from the audience. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Alejandro Bonilla, who is the chair of the NGO Committee on Aging. Also, he is the president of the Association of Former International Public Officials for Development, GRACILS. He's an expert actuary with the dual Mexican and Swiss nationality. He has a rich career spanning across public and international sectors. His early career involved enhancing Mexico's social security systems, transitioning to impactful roles at the International Labor Organization in Geneva from 1990, where he promoted social security standards in retirement schemes globally. He has served in various capacities, including senior actuary, deputy regional director for the Americas, and director of the Social Protection Department of the ILO. He now leads GRACILS, as mentioned before, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you, Alejandro. Thanks for your time. We know that you have been quite busy. Now you are about to participate in New York in several events related to aging. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Ana Lucia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. It's really a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm really so grateful that everybody's addressing so many forums and meetings and issues on older people. You will not be surprised that I will focus as a complement to what Dorothea just mentioned on Social Security and retirement. And I would start far from technical issues. One of my favorite writers is Mario Benedetti, who wrote Death and Other Surprises. I wish he would have written Death, Retirement, and Other Surprises. Retirement is always, and old age is always a surprise. In my experience working in so many countries in retirement issues, I know that older people are the others. At the family level, we don't really consider, nobody tells us that we're going to be old. At school, nobody tells us that we're going to be old. We can go through all careers in economics, in business, in whatever you mentioned, whatever your specialty is, with, of course, the exclusion of demographers and actuaries possibly. you don't really have a focus. So it would really be surprising that we have policies on older people if the families and the school system don't really mention that. I think there's also an issue about definition. We talk always about older people as if it were the others. And it would be, I think, more accurate to mention people at old age. We are people at old age. Something that is really very important for actuaries is to avoid the perception that death in particular comes at the end of life. We have mortality tables and we see that death comes at every age, and that is linked also with what is related to not only older age pensions, but widowers pensions and orphans pensions. Also, another point I would like to mention is in the title of this meeting is the implications of demographic shifts on social and economic security through labor markets and leisure. I could only even possibly turn it around. Implications on of social and economic insecurity into demographic shifts. I I'm convinced that we have really very little choices in life. We don't really choose to be born in a developed country or in a developing country. We don't choose where to be born in a country where it's just going through hyperinflation, through war, through aggression, through recession, through instability, in a populous country, in a country with no growth, in a country with an incredibly big debt, in a country where the informal economy is the vast majority of the economy, nobody chooses that. So the starting point, as was mentioned by Dorotea, is not like a plain level field for everybody. There's another thing that is really common in every country, on the other hand, which is that we all want to grow. All the economics in the world really want to grow. And if you define that, you will need a final demand and you need consumption. If you see the newspapers in France and in Germany, in the last week only, they were complaining a little bit that people are saving too much and that people need to spend more to uh, put into gear the economy. They are lowering in Europe the interest rates so that people can afford more consumption. And on the other hand, there are choices that we do that go beyond the policies. I will arrive to the policies. We have sports, we have musical lover, we have iPhones, we have tablets, we have many things, and it's not really in the current culture right now to save for the future. And I always mention the future is not what it was. If you hear Greta Thunberg or Anne Matter, the future is not really very promising to many people. That's why many are even thinking, I will not have children now, which is something that is pushing really very much the ratio between young and older people. Economic insecurity is pushing people not to have enough children. And you see that in some countries there are um, incentives to have more children. But to me, more importantly, there's another thing. After Second World War, we all adopted, many countries adopted the ILO conventions on, and this is the key word, on social insurance. And insurance means that we were spreading the the risk, the social risk through the whole country. It was the basic concept that we had. It was in Convention 102. Everybody said we need to insure ourselves for economic and social risk for old age. And everybody said, well, that's reasonable. Social insurance insuring is something that we really need, it's an element of development. But in recent years, many countries have been moving apart from that, and many individuals have been moving apart from that. And in many countries, the election has been on pensions and on retirement issues and income security of older people, it's to move away from insurance. So to have auto insurance and also moving away from public schemes. Many say they are not sustainable, and then they should move to not insuring systems, but to individual systems. And I have defended the position of the ILO. Those individual systems that are not based in social insurance, they will produce good results if you're a man, if you're alive, if you have a high level of education, if you're in a steady economy, if you have a decent job, and if you have a high density of contribution. It will not work for those who are in the formal economy, for those who have a density of contribution lower. It will not work for women because with maternity, with the lower salaries that they still receive and the longer life expectancy, they will receive lower pensions. So there has been a decision at all levels to move from ensuring the social and economic risk to auto-insure and to each one of us taking individually the risk. This has moved all the financing of pension schemes from insurance to savings. And of course, there are interests behind all this. When you ask the employers all over the world are pushing to privatize uh, pension systems, and some governments are trying to keep public uh, uh, solutions. There are two very important points, and I will finish with it. Two very important points that are often forgotten and sometimes not even considered. In 2001, at the ILO, there was a very crucial historical agreement on what's called the new consensus. The new consensus on retirement and the new consensus on income security for older people based on whatever labor market you might have and whatever economic system you might have. And this in basic mention, respecting ILO standards, it's safe, it's good, it's good. You shouldn't oppose public with private. They should be complemented. You should not oppose insurance with savings. They should be complemented. So if you see those countries that were mentioned by Dorothea, they don't really have a one uh, pillar pension system for restoring income security at old age. They usually have three or more pillars. One pillar which is based on public financing and public policies, one pillar complementary that is based on employment, and then one pillar that is based on your own individual contribution for your retirement. You have to make choices. So those countries that are more successful in ensuring uh, a decent level of life and decent income at old age are those who are distributing the risk and complementing uh, public policies with education, complementing them with civil society intervention and participation. And something that is usually lacking in many fora, and we push at the NGO Committee on Aging to have it, is to ask pensioners and ask old age, what do they want? What do they need? What do they want to do? It's not something that we can decide without them. As you see the people with handicap, they mention nothing for us without us. I think that is something that we should move on. Sometimes the ILO tripartism, which is fantastic, lacks a little bit of getting those people at old age. So with all this, I say it's really very important to have public policies. It's really very important to have education. It's really important to have public awareness. And we don't have a silver bullet solution in every country. We have to tailor-make the solution depending on the situation of each country. So it's a multidimensional thing, and it's something that we can all contribute. And we, of course, public policies are really very important. We cannot depend on them for our own future. We have to take hands on them. Well, thank you very much. I think I took my 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Ana Lucia, and I will be ready for questions later. Unfortunately, I will have to leave early because, as you mentioned, Ana Lucia, I have another commitment here in New York. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alejandro, for stressing on the importance of inclusive language and pension systems that are sustainable to avoid intergenerational frictions. I'm quite agree with you. Let me now continue with well-known experts on the rights of older persons. She's Sara Loriato, Policy Officer on Employment and European Parliament Liaison at Age Platform Europe. She is in charge of Age's policy activities in the fields of employment, participation, and active citizenship, in old age. She also monitors EU initiatives on volunteering for older people and lifelong learning. She's responsible for the task force dedicated to employment, participation, and active citizenship. Sara also coordinates age relations with the European Parliament and the EP interest group on intergenerational solidarity. She joined AGE in 2022 after gaining experience in the European Commission and with Amnesty International. Please, Sara, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Ana Lucia, and hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for having me today in this online roundtable. I'm indeed policy officer working specifically on employment and participation in old age. And I'm working with age members to develop the advocacy of age platform and echo the voice of older people at EU level. Can I have the presentation? Yeah, great. So you can go straight to the second. Yes, great, perfect. So just a quick introduction of who we are for those of you who do not know. So Age Platform Europe is the largest European network of organizations composed of older people or representing older people in European member states. We have around 100 members, and we exist since 2001. And our role here at the Secretariat, so based in Brussels, is really to echo the voice of our members. Next slide, please. So yeah, at AGE, we really adopt a human rights-based approach in our advocacy work. And the right to work is at the core of our advocacy and our work when it comes to employment and aging, of course, but in other type of policies. We also insist a lot on the need to adopt a new and adapted vision of the life course. And we really believe that today's policies are limited by a three-stage vision. Next slide, please. For us, it is really an archaic concept of the life cycle that undermines the right to work and the right to education as well. The graph here shows how a three-stage vision of education, work, and retirement can limit these rights because it does not reflect the reality of people in the labor market or in life in general, in the society in general. Such a vision compromises current and future employment policies and cannot properly reflect what aging on the labor market and in society means and implies. Next slide, please. So yeah, at AGE, we advocate for a new vision, something that is more adapted and that includes a multi-stage life course approach. So you can see basically that in pretty much the first stage of life, we might include leisure activities, learning, with later on a progressive entry on the labor market, then kind of a middle stage divided between work, education, care for children or older relatives. It can also include sabbaticals or learning activities. And finally, in older age, work, leisure activities, education might also be included when the retirement age is reached. And this vision, we believe, is necessary to really reveal and include the potential of older workers in employment policies and aging strategies. Of course, all this cannot exist, be fair, and meet the needs of an aging population if we do not take into account the need for an adequate income for workers and also for retirees. These lifelong options must be the results of individual choice, and this choice cannot be undermined by lack of income, ageism, lack of support on the labor market, and inadequate working conditions. Yeah, next slide, please. So this is what we have been working on with our members during the past 2 years, and after noting a certain numbers of conditions were not being met in Europe, because we work on the European sphere. So those conditions were not met and do not enable people to age at work and continue to be active on the labor market if they wanted to. And one of the observations that we made is, or was, that 2/5 of the persons aged between 55 and 64 in Europe do not work. Next slide, please. So we worked together during 2 years on a barometer that we published last year, where we gathered good practices from EU member states. And we use those practices to draft recommendations on how we can support sustainable and quality working lives. And we addressed 3 main aspects that we believe is important to include in employment in aging and employment strategies. The first one being what support is necessary for older workers on the labor market, how to tackle age discrimination, again, in the labor market, and how to develop workplaces for all ages. I'm going to go through these 3 aspects, to give you an overview and of our conclusion, but I won't go into details because it's really a big piece of work. But I invite you to have a look on it on our website and to ask me any question that you have during the Q&A session. But yeah, you can go to the next slide. So very quickly on the first aspect, though, the support to all the workers in companies, but more globally in the labor market. We went through career management, how to manage an aging workforce. We addressed issues related to lifelong learning, to adult education, and of course to minimum income and adequate pensions. And we had a very good and positive practices from the Netherlands in terms of learning a second career. Or in Belgium, they have kind of a collective agreement in the private sectors to make sure that managers are trained to and have a strategy on how to manage an aging workforce. Next slide. So the second aspect was more related to the fight against ageism in employment, and it goes to the recruitment process at work in general with good training programs from Romania, Slovenia. We also addressed the age limits to access work and trainings that still exist in some member states, if not in all. And we've addressed, of course, the intersectionality aspect with the big focus on older women during their career. And here I refer to the policy in Sweden that is pretty advanced on that topic. Next slide, please. And yeah, so the last phase was to consider what it means to adapt to workplaces that is for all ages. And so it goes through health and security at work, including mental health, working condition with flexibility of time when we talk about work-life integration, what here in Europe we call work-life balance, but at H we prefer the term work-life integration. And there is a part also in terms of digitalization. How do we adapt workplaces to make sure that in one hand, digitalization can help aging at work, but in other hand, how do we train people to be able to work with the new digital tools? Yeah, so I invite you to have a look on the website. It's far more complete than what I've just explained. But we can go to the second phase of the presentation with the next slide, please. And it is in regards to participation, which includes, of course, political, civil participation, but also leisure activities and lifestyle choices for older people. We believe that aging policies must consistently refer to older people as right holders. This seems obvious, yet it is too often assumed that leaving the labor market is equal to leaving the society. The choice is no longer at the heart of decisions made by older people, and they find usually themselves limited in their daily life and daily choices. Next slide, please. So yeah, here is only, I love the quotes from Anne Karpf, reminding that aging is a lifelong process and that we age from the moment we are born, and it echoes what Mr. Bonilla just said. We can go to the next slide. And as actually you rightly put in the concept note, access to leisure activities can be limited by financial constraints, health problem, inadequate infrastructure, and it is important that three major obstacles faced by older people are tackled by decision makers. It is again, and I echo what said Dorothea before, it is again ageism and age discrimination. And of course, accessibility and affordability of those activities, of the places and the means for civic and political participation. It includes also the access to information and the freedom of expression. And yeah, to achieve this presentation, I would just say that I believe it is really essential to include all the people in decision-making processes, but also in monitoring processes of the decision taken to make sure that it is adequate and applicable in real life. Yeah, next slide, please. Next slide, sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. My presentation is over and I remain available if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing the findings from your commendable work for the Age Barometer publication 2023. We look forward to go through the document, and I'm sure that we will be learning some relevant elements to keep working on this issue. Now, it's a pleasure to introduce you our dear colleague, Mr. Ricardo Pla Cordero. He works as Protection Officer in the Division of International Protection at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, where he provides technical support on the rights of persons with disabilities and older persons under the UNHCR's mandate, which includes refugees, asylum seekers, returnees, internally displaced persons, and persons in situation of statelessness. As a development and humanitarian worker, Ricardo has experience in the design, implementation, and monitoring of human rights programming and in the development of policy and guidance on the rights of persons with disabilities and older persons in situations of conflict and disasters. It's a pleasure to have you here, dear Ricardo. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I had some slides, so if you can please share. I will start with a short introduction on access to employment. I will focus on refugees in particular, well, given the time and as well the focus of the report that I'm going to use as a background of the two reports. So, and also because of the issues that this specific population experiences. So we go to the first slide. We have a two graphics representing access to employment. On the left side, we have the situation on or the improvement on access to employment in practice in 2023 with a comparative from 2019 to 2021. Here we are talking about refugees without any age desegregation. I will go to that later. But what is a very good finding is that from 2019, we've seen a very strong increase in accessing formal employment in practice for refugees throughout the world. However, we still see that while having the full legal rights to access employment is still on 67%. So this is a second finding, right? Like the restrictions for accessing formal employment for refugees is not 100%, and we will see why in 1 second. But still, while having 67% of refugees across the world the right to access to employment in a formal way, only 45% have access to in practice. Now, if we go to the next slide, this is just to keep in mind, right? There are several restrictions for refugees to access in practice employment. The first one, the top one, and keeps steady being one of the issues is administrative or practical restrictions, right? Administrative usually can be the absence of documentation, the absence of processes, administrative processes that can acknowledge and recognize documents, working documents or identity documents of persons, of refugee looking for employment. But we have as well more specific employment documents as well as a second factor that can be an issue in accessing employment. And then we have an issue of actual knowledge, right? The awareness of both refugees and as well employers in their own rights in accessing formal employment opportunities. We go to the next slide. What we can see is this situation, what we said, well, there's access in practice, there's better access in practice, still is low, and there are several issues that include issues with documentation or knowledge, information. We apply this to older persons and going to reports that have been conducted in regions such as the Americas, but that we finding across the world is that there is a very first problem, and is that older persons who are forced to flee their country, so they are seeking international protection and they are abroad, they may lack documentation that they may not only have left behind, but never possessed. For example, having a passport, it is a requirement, right, to travel legally. But many older persons who are often deciding to stay as long as they can in conflict areas because of not having an idea or being very scared on the possibilities of leaving their places where they have their social networks, their belongings, their pensions, where those exist. When they take those decisions of moving, there may be already many additional issues to access any type of documentation. So they may be using illegal crossing border possibilities, or they may be moving with very basic documents, but not sufficient documentation to ensure accessing to any type of formal employment. This is one of the issues that we see. The second is that those having a pension, and here hearing what colleagues were mentioning before, I have to highlight that many of these situations where older persons take the option, right, of having a pension and not working anymore are very few in comparison with the entirety of the population. So those who have a pension, they will experience issues in accessing that pension from another country, right? Because pensions are usually non-transferable. There are issues in terms of, well, first, if you are persecuted in your country, having access to legal documentation and to embassies, the protection or given by your country may be already at risk, or putting you at risk if you go to seek support in this regard. But second, there may be as well taxation differences, or there may be just, again, loss of documentation, right? The documentation or the legal as well pathways to recognize and transfer systems to new countries may be lacking because they're of lack of international agreements, etc. And the last one, imagine if it's already challenging for any of us. I don't know if colleagues online have tried to understand their own pension system, if they have one. It's a very challenging issue, right? Trying to understand how is it working, where can I look for things, where I can physically ask for support, if I have questions, where I can find a human, right, to ask a question. Imagine that in forced displacement, right, where many times or most of the times information is not going to be available, one, in their language, and two, through a human interaction. So we are going to find many digitalized spaces. So this is a very, very, well, dramatic picture of the situation of older persons in forced displacement, but I wanted to start with this first barrier. And I'm going to add another one because it was included as well in the theme, right, or the topics treated in this webinar, and is the care dilemma. So if we go to the next slide, in the same report that I mentioned, it's this global survey of livelihoods. We have we expand to the entire population. What are the restrictions faced by women in this case and older adolescents? So those considered, as well as our colleague from ILO was highlighting, right? The one of the populations experiencing more issues in accessing employment. So the restrictions that refugee women and refugee older adolescents are facing, the first one with a very strong difference, almost 70%, is having responsibilities, what we usually call household chores that include childcare, cooking, or cleaning, but as well caring of older persons or persons with disabilities. Why do I call this the care dilemma? Because what we are hearing in these years from the efforts to improve gender equality across the world is sentences or analysis made in this light, right? Women and older adolescents, most of the times older girls, I mean, young girls or older teenagers, they have this burden, right? And we employ, again, this type of term on caring for older persons or persons with disabilities. While, and here I share my opinion, there would be a different strategy or approach to take to this issue, and is talking about responsibilities that states and civil society in their default, right, in the absence of a sustainable state could be taken to facilitate access for women and older adolescents to study and employment opportunities, while providing a dignified and safe access to care for older persons and persons with disabilities. Without that transformation happening, and happening through policies, happening through well-structured systems that ensure the dignity, the independence, the autonomy of older persons and persons with disabilities, we don't want people institutionalized in their homes, and even less institutionalized in institutions, right? We would like having options and having possibilities to receive care that is of quality, but with options for where that would happen. If we would have this shift, right, there would be more opportunities for employment first, because that generates employment, regulated employment. And second, there would be more possibilities for dignified care and for access to education and employment for older persons, I mean, older adolescents and women. So putting this dilemma in there as other of the questions, and now going, well, trying to go to some recommendations. If we can go to the next slide, there would be some possibilities, right? In terms of, well, still, right, and continue with this note, just adding to the situation that there will be situations of separation from community networks. So that should be taken into account. What I mentioned was at the global level, what could be considered, right, to have safe and dignified access to care. But then for refugees, displaced older persons, we should also consider that they are going to be separated from their community networks. So exposed to heightened risk of violence and abuse. And there would be a need to mobilize communities and again, to acknowledge that these populations are in in the jurisdiction of a certain state and provide, ensure equal access to those services. And as well, additional issues, tackling with additional issues such as the loss of medication-assisted devices, all the additional problems that they may be facing because of displacement, plus the psychological toll of displacement in itself, right, which is not to be neglected. Going to the next slide and almost finishing here, there are some promising practices and there are some enabling actions that we could put in place, right? We've seen that where we have a better monitoring access to employment and access to social protection schemes for older persons, we have as well better policy making, right? So states sharing employment rates for their population should include as well those employment rates for refugees, right? And those should be desegregated by sex, age, and disability, so we can understand better the heterogeneity of these groups. There has to be an effort to remove policy and administrative barriers to access employment. There's a responsibility of the states to provide for the protection of refugees in their jurisdiction, and there is an opportunity in engaging formally with refugees as workforce, as learners, as individuals with full rights. So removing those barriers is important to ensure the full protection in line with the 1951 Convention of Refugees. And then at a more medial and micro level, ensuring accessibility of information, including in languages, the premises, ensure that there are alternative ways of accessing information. We see now many QR codes, many digital forms that need to be filled, and taking into account that, yes, older persons have been becoming more and more literate from a digital point of view, but still there is a population that will require, for a time, at least a human interaction, and the human interaction is always preferred, right, for certain processes. And then focusing on older persons themselves. And for example, organizations, non-governmental organizations, and older persons associations who have a very good understanding of how the country works, they could offer training to refugees who have arrived to their countries, and mentoring, coaching on how to go through the processes, right? And sharing their own experiences. Going to some promising practices in this regards. And just having in the next slide, you can see a picture, for example, on cash for work in Afghanistan. But we see other promising practices as well in India, in Venezuela, for example, where with programming with indigenous people, we've seen this type of cross-generational support as well, and the provision or transpassing of techniques for employment and for traditional aircrafts, but as well land management, etc. That would be very beneficial for younger populations. We've seen as well the importance of changing access to national systems, so protection systems, and efforts done in Costa Rica and in other countries. We are monitoring how many countries are considering more and more this change from or efforts to make national protection systems accessible for refugees. And we see that in previous years, 2-3 previous years ago, there was 2-3 countries annually that were reporting those changes. And now we've seen 15-16 countries annually reporting on those changes. And we see as well the importance of participation as well in assistance programming, in humanitarian assistance programming. What I've been mentioning, to make it very clear, I wasn't talking about humanitarian assistance, right? I was talking about developing and developed countries that are hosting refugees and where those changes need a more of a development approach. So working with ILO in this regard would be very important. But where we have more of a humanitarian assistance approach, and where organizations such as UNHCR are sometimes providing employment opportunities, cash for work, as you can see in the picture, there has been consultations made, and for example in Rwanda there were concerns from refugees, older refugees, on not being considered eligible for employment and cash for work while they were wanting to do so. So UNHCR changing those eligibility requirements to provide equal access to them. Now, these are very little and isolated practices, but if we go to the next slide, we see that there are multi-country opportunities that states and colleagues in the hall could leverage and could participate in. And in particular, they are channeled through the Global Compact on refugees. There are multi-stakeholder pledges, and one in particular on economic inclusion and social protection, where the states, academia, NGOs are welcome to join and they pledge and contribute with their efforts to a better economic inclusion and social protection, and in particular having more partners from the aging angle would be very, very welcome. So I will put the link to that pledge in the chat, or I will share with colleagues in UNITAR. And with this, there will be more resources in the next slide for colleagues interested. But with this, I will close my intervention. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, dear Ricardo, for this important information. You have clearly explained the complexities for older persons in situation of forced displacement and statelessness, who may face even worse challenges than other persons due to the accumulated vulnerabilities. So this is really good to have you here. And now I give the floor back to our dear colleague, Ebru. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all our distinguished speakers. We have covered very challenging aspects of course, with some promising aspects, with challenging aspects also of the socioeconomic conditions and demographics for the older people, aging population, from different angles. So I would like to thank once again. If I may ask, this is a question that I would like to invite all our panelists. But I know that Alejandro would, would start if he would like to, in position, of course. In terms of adapting solutions to the context of each country, can we just elaborate on specific initiatives, ongoing initiatives that may serve as a platform for states for sharing, on pension systems or good practices on the displaced people? And because as Ricardo, for instance, mentioned the displaced people, we know in different parts of the world, not only the displaced people are displaced because of conflicts and wars, but also the earthquakes, floods, and so forth and so on. So it is quite essential to have the digital literacy, but of course, even for the host societies, for the aging populations, having the digital literacy is a great challenge. We have witnessed this during the times of COVID, for instance. Can we just specifically give some good practices or examples to overcome these challenges, that achieve these challenges already? Thank you very much.
Ebru, if I may please, and please accept my deep apologies, because we thought that Alejandro was about to leave, so that's why we started already with the questions. But thank you so much, Alejandro, for being here. And if you don't mind, please, considering that you are still here, and we are missing our dear Dr. Stein, who always join us for his special slot. If you don't mind, Alejandro, could it be possible that first Dr. Stein help us with his analysis on the legal obligations and responsibilities for older persons in the framework of our discussion? Please accept my deep apologies, dear Michael, and please, the floor is yours.
Well, if I might, and thank you, Alejandro, I would much rather yield to your time constraints and other commitments, being that you're at the UN in New York, and I would be delighted to speak after you.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you very much for the question, and Lucia for giving me the opportunity. I possibly give you one or two good practices that I have in mind. One of them is the case of Uruguay. Uruguay, they made an agreement between the Social Security Institution and the Ministry of Education. So to include from elementary school and high school, the elements of the life cycle and the elements of public financing and the elements of Social Security. So the children in Uruguay, they know that we are all together in this. We are a nation. We are moving together as a nation. And some of us, we're going to be employers and we'll have to pay taxes. Some of us, we're going to be workers, but we are together in this. And paying taxes, paying Social Security contributions is something that is good. So children and youth in Uruguay, they know that we are in a nation and that we have to work together. The other thing, it's the access to information. I had the opportunity to participate at the UN responses to the earthquake in Haiti and to the tsunami in Sri Lanka. And the main issue that I had is that widows, in particularly older widows, they don't have the slightest idea of their rights. The deaf workers, they had some kind of idea of what was going on, but the widowers and the orphans, they didn't have. UN staff, we were surrounded by people that didn't know their rights. And one of the issues was, in particular, language. We thought, or actually the authorities thought, that having a legal framework in French in Haiti would be enough. The thing is that 95% of the population, they speak Creole, not necessarily French. And others is that if we have a written text of 400 pages on Social Security and labor laws, nobody would read it. Nobody had access. So what they did, and I think it was a very good practice in both cases, is to disseminate information on the rights in the right language by radio. There were the 10 minutes of Social Security, the 10 minutes for social protection every day on the radio. And that had a much more impact than publicizing in different ways the legal framework. So I think there is a way, and we have to find a ways to reach people everywhere. But of course we have to get in touch with them. Thank you very much for the questions, and apologies that I really have to leave. I will really be willing to watch the rest of the recording and keep in touch with all of you. Thank you very much for your attention. Bye.
Thank you so much, Alejandro, and thank you once again, Dr. Stein, for your understanding. Please, the floor is yours.
Oh, I was grateful to learn from our colleague, Alejandro. Thank you for that. So just a few thoughts, putting together some comments and ideas raised by colleagues on the panel. And that is, going across several of your remarks, is the notion that there seems to be a tension of opportunities or a tension of resources as between youth or younger folks and older persons. And it's unfortunate that that's the way that it's being presented very often by states and others when trying to create social schemes. And it's the same kind of tension that's presented, for example, not just in employment and labor markets, but also across the board on social protection, in public health, and in other realms. Where are we going to spend our limited resources? And the unfortunate result of that is often advocacy by these groups, which we all have multiple identities, but we tend to prioritize one or more over the others. And then we become in conflict with each other. And that's an unfortunate thing, because in this world which has gone more to the right and more to the neoclassical economic realm, we're in great need of solidarity and allyship, and thinking about increasing opportunities and increasing the size of the pie, rather than fighting with each other over pieces of the pie. This is in particular urgency in that one phrase that I didn't hear use, AI, is going to compound shortages, especially in the labor market. We know that there's going to be something like 800,000 jobs lost over the next 2 decades, if not more. So one question regarding older persons is, how can we use these ideas and these changing realities to try to increase opportunities and to try to improve social welfare, mental health, social inclusion? In particular, in relation to older persons, loneliness and social isolation are profound, and the effects upon health, both mental and physical, are quite profound. So maybe we can think more about alliances between older persons and youth. Maybe we could think about ways in which devices and techniques such as artificial intelligence can increase social connectedness. But that, of course, comes down to another theme raised by several of the people on panel, and that is older persons are not as adroit, not as trained, and not as considered as appropriate for things like information and communication technology. So how do we make sure that they are using these devices? Frankly, I have trouble with them too, to ensure that they can continue to be productive and valued. How do we think in terms of the labor market about efficiencies, perhaps in a different way? Rather than thinking about entry costs to salary and benefits, which is always described as being much higher for older persons, maybe we could think about the opportunity or the secondary benefits that incur when we have people with experience who simply know how to do the job better. because they've been doing it for a long period of time. Maybe we can consider the reduced training costs, the reduced onboarding costs, and the greater efficiencies of having individuals who actually know how these operations, entities, corporations, whatever, operate. That's something that's not usually discussed. We have across the board, we should also remember that older persons, much like disabled persons, intersect. There's a great intersection between disability and aging. If you are lucky enough to live, you will have a disability at some point. That's simply a fact. What type of disability is in God's hands, not in ours. But it's a cross-cutting issue. So is gender. The intersection of gender and aging we discussed a little bit, but perhaps not quite enough. The discrimination that is included there, both from the general social stigma of pushing women and even girls into caregiving positions rather than into earning positions, forcing them to be the household supporters. And then when they're are required to enter into the labor market at some point, whether it's through widowhood, whether it's through necessity, not having the education, the training, and the expectation of their being members of there. We had also mentioned pensions, which raises such an interesting and troubling agenda as relates to gender, because women do live longer than men. And from a purely economic point of view, of course, then pensions are going to incur greater costs for the same age beginning woman as for a man. But we believe from a non-discrimination approach that we ought not to never discount women's pensions. So what do we do about that? What do we do about the notion of stigma and access raised by Ms. Laureano very nicely? Because it cuts across disability, cuts across age, cuts across gender implications. Are certain individuals thought to be more appropriate for certain employments? I'm not, it's something we need to wrestle with. And finally, we also, as part of today's workshop, were to speak about social inclusion and leisure activities. And we need to very much underscore that we do not have a living in the community type of agenda among our DPO, among our NGOs relating to age, especially in middle income and up countries. Congregate care, nursing homes, and other places that come with various euphemistic names are horrible. They're all horrible. Where is the deinstitutionalization movement on behalf of elders? Where is the prevention of violence and abuse, something that was raised during the Human Rights Commissioner's workshop back in June, and that helped to precipitate some of the movement towards an older person's treaty. So how do we think about a life of dignity to begin with, and then on top of that, life that includes leisure, value for what you have contributed to society, and value for simply having experience, knowledge, and wisdom. Just some thoughts to help stimulate our Q&A.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Stein, for your thoughts. As you know, you're a good friend of UNITAR, and your participation in the framework of the series is a core aspect through all the events we have. Now, please, Ebru, you have the floor to continue with the questions and answers from the speakers.
Thank you very much, and apologies again, Dr. Steen. Well, I would like to, remind the first concern, the first question of maybe discussion, considering that we don't have too much time left for this important panel today. But I would like to add maybe another component, as Dr. Steen just mentioned, the linked with youth. Maybe I would like to ask the panel, of course, it's an invitation to all the panel. whether demographic circumstances and social arrangements in advanced industrial societies will be able to continue to support an intergenerational contact, or will this demographic shift in the age structures cause a contract to break down? And thank you very much. If we may get volunteers from our panel, that would be great. And please, the floor is yours. Dr. Steen, would you like to elaborate a little bit on this? And also, Ricardo, maybe the first question was related to the displaced people. Any good examples, good cases that we can refer to? Is there a good practice? And of course, keeping in mind the language barriers of the displaced people in their final destinations. How pressing is it from your perspective? Thank you very much.
Well, I think our colleagues from UNHCR would have better insight on it, but the case studies that we've done on refugees as well as internally displaced people show that it's often a case of what we call ableism, you may call ageism or other isms. It's always the people who are considered able-bodied, capable of quote unquote contributing to societies who are integrated first. And people who are considered not fitting within the norm of able-bodiedness, normality, etc., who are last. So I'm afraid I don't have good practice examples. I would love to hear some, and I would love for them to be followed.
Thank you. And well, from my side, there are very few examples that I've heard from state practices. One of them was the pledge, for example, shared by Thailand back in 2019 on providing documentation for older persons who were in situations of statelessness in country, right? And ensuring access to rights through having a document and an identity. Most of the cases where we see support and intergenerational support provided are actually driven by national civil society organizations, right? And we see those in Syria, we see this in Venezuela, where they're in Afghanistan or India, right? Where there are projects for intergenerational support, for example, older persons clubs, etc., being established, but all these driven by national civil society. There is still a need for acknowledgement by states to take that step and avoid breaking the contract, as you said. With this, I will have to leave. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Yes, Dorothea, please.
Thank you. Just a couple of remarks to some of the things that were said. In terms of good practices, we do have, or we are very engaged in a project which is called Prospects, which is funded by the Netherlands. And there, the purpose is really to use digitalization and technical progress for refugees to integrate them into labor markets. Now, what we do achieve relatively easily is that, for example, we make sure that refugees have access to technologies and that we build their capacities to use the technology. And then quite often we also manage to get them into their first job, which is very often a job in the gig economy, with all the issues that comes with that. But that's, of course, something we are also trying to tackle. But the point I want to make is it does help And of course, these are very nice success stories, but of course, it's not at a large scale. And it's only in the countries where we accompany this by a policy that it actually becomes more sustainable, and it becomes not so much an issue of, NGOs providing this service, but it becomes something of a political commitment. And we have seen this happening, for example, in Kenya, but also in other countries. It's very difficult. It's politically super, super sensitive, as you can imagine, but we have seen it work, and we hope we can further push on that. I just want to make one remark as well regarding technology and older people. From the studies that we have done and from the studies that we have read, more importantly, the use of technology for older people depends very much on whether they have used it all their life or not. Okay, so it's not an issue that old people cannot use technology. The problem is if you stop using technology at a certain point for whatever reason, and then you try to restart again, that's when it becomes more difficult. And that refers to this concept of lifelong learning. It's the same with languages. We know that older people can learn languages as well as young people if they have never stopped learning languages. The second you stop learning something, you lose the ability to learn in this specific area. And that's just very, very important to keep in mind. And that's why we should never, ever stop learning on issues that are relevant for the development. And that is also linked to another comment I wanted to make with regard to productivity of older people and assuming that their productivity goes down when they grow older. Now, the first thing is we are comparing, apples with oranges here, because there's hardly a single old person that does the same job as a young person. So when we measure the productivity, we compare two completely different things. And in the type of work that an older person does, there is very often, as was mentioned, this element of experience where we profit from. But it's just literally impossible to compare the productivity. Now, the few studies that manage to do it, they actually see very little evidence for, older people up to the age of around 60 becoming less efficient. Of course, if it's physical work, then of course it's an issue. But as I said, it's not the goal to have an older person do exactly the same job as the job he did when he was 20. So I think this is again one of these perceptions. If we don't overcome them, then concepts like intergenerational solidarity will be impossible, because we always think, the young people will always think we do this for the old people. But once we overcome these perceptions, and we know that older peoples can contribute in many ways, maybe even better than young people in different areas, in non-competitive areas, then we can start discussing intergenerational approaches. So I will stop here. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. That was an excellent elaboration on the topic. I know that we are already running out of time, but if I may ask, there is this question in the chat, Sarah, if I may ask to you, direct this question to you, is it realistic to integrate general ideas about social security and insurance programs for people in older age groups into education? And would it be effective in encouraging the young people to advocate for better public policies, focusing on the older groups? And thank you very much. If you can get your remarks on that in a couple of minutes, that'd be great.
Yes, totally. I totally believe in, I mean, I say I, but the Age Platform Europe actually, and this is a topic that we've been discussing with our members, and we are working on it during the important European elections that happened a few months ago, but are still a big topic today for any EU network. Because of the new commission that has been recently appointed. And this is something that we work on, intergenerational fairness, and the fact that the youth and the oldest should work together towards a better social inclusion. This is a topic that it is hard to put at the at the agenda of at least EU leaders, but we believe in this and we work for this. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Ana Lucia, I think we can go back to you. And well, thank you very much for an excellent discussion. We learned a lot this afternoon. For us, the afternoon, of course, for our participants and those who were with us. We'd like to thank each of you and also the audience, dear colleagues from different parts of the world, for your comments and contributions in the chat box as well. And I'll leave the last words to Ana Lucia as she convened us today on our third webinar. And thank you very much on behalf of UNITAR Division for Social Development Program. And Ana Lucia, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Ebru and dear colleagues. And for all of you, you are warmly invited to the fourth event of the series, which will be focused on the intersectionality of discrimination faced by older persons. It will take place on Thursday, on the 17th of October, 2024. You can find the link and further information at our online portfolio. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to welcome you all in the next event. All the best. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.